The public is being conditioned to watch the sky for missiles. This is a strategic misdirection. Media fixates on kinetic events, drone strikes in Russian border regions, Israeli strikes undermining stability in Lebanon. These are loud, visible, and fundamentally antiquated metrics of power. The primary vector for systemic collapse is not kinetic. It is silent. While the world tracks explosions, the true solvency protocol for a cornered state is being activated against the global nervous system. The threat is not a bang, it is the absolute absence of signal. CSIS analysis confirms the two primary targets. First, undersea data cables. Severing a handful of these choke points doesn't just slow down the internet, it severs financial markets from liquidity. It isolates entire continents. Second, satellite blinding. Not with expensive anti-satellite missiles, but with ground-based lasers or high-powered microwave weapons that induce temporary or permanent sensor failure. This protocol creates the blind Leviathan, a superpower still possessing overwhelming military force, rendered deaf, dumb, and blind. It cannot see threats. It cannot process transactions. It cannot command its own assets. A state with thousands of nuclear warheads reduced to a clumsy giant, thrashing in the dark. This isn't warfare. It is the surgical removal of an opponent's situational awareness, triggering a systemic collapse from within. The official narrative is a lie. States do not go to war for ideology. They go to war to balance their books. When a nation's internal liabilities exceed its political and economic assets, it faces a solvency crisis. It is functionally bankrupt. This is the mechanism you are not supposed to understand. Examine the Russian Federation. Authoritative analysis from CSIS frames the Ukraine war not as a geopolitical gambit, but as a solvency event. The staggering kinetic cost and cratering public approval morphed the campaign into a profound domestic liability. The state was bleeding political capital. Surrender was not an option. Default was not an option. This weakness forced a pivot. When a state cannot win conventionally, it changes the rules of the game. It triggers a pre-calculated lunge into asymmetry. This is not chaos. It is a protocol. The objective shifts from territorial gain to systemic disruption. The goal becomes maximizing the kinetic cost for the adversary at the lowest possible price. The result is a mathematical certainty. The conflict metastasizes. As reported, drone strikes now occur in Russian border regions. The war has become reciprocal and asymmetric. This is the blueprint. Internal instability, like the economic downturn gripping Iran, is the accelerant for this protocol. Each regional flashpoint, from Lebanon to Venezuela, is another state approaching its own solvency crisis, ready to launch its own asymmetric escalation. The system is designed to cascade. The central equation of state-on-state warfare has been inverted. The Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, has modeled the emergent reality. The kinetic cost of offense versus defense is no longer symmetrical. A state invests $5 million in a main battle tank, a complex asset requiring a logistical train of fuel, maintenance, and trained personnel. The asymmetric adversary invests $500 in a first-person view drone with an explosive payload. The math is irrefutable. For every dollar of lethal force projected by the aggressor, the defender must spend $10,000 to counter it. This is not a sustainable model. It is a systemic bleed-out. This economic inversion is the engine of what strategists call the democratization of violence. The monopoly on projecting significant kinetic force, once held exclusively by nation-states with massive defense budgets, has been broken. The barrier to entry is no longer industrial capacity. It is a credit card and a Wi-Fi connection. This transforms every regional flashpoint, from Lebanon to the Russian border, into a live-fire testbed for low-cost, high-leverage attrition protocols. A state facing a solvency crisis, such as Iran, doesn't need a blue-water navy to threaten global stability. It needs a swarm of cheap drones. Therefore, the primary objective of this asymmetric strategy is not to win on the battlefield. It is to trigger a solvency crisis in the target state. The goal is to force the superpower to spend itself into bankruptcy, defending against a threat that costs fractions of a penny on the dollar to deploy. Each drone launched, as seen in strikes in Russian border regions, is an economic attack vector. This is the launch-on-warning protocol for a failing state, designed to drag the global system down with it by making the price of intervention mathematically untenable. The battlefield is no longer a geographic location. It is a distributed network of proxy laboratories. These are not random hotspots of instability. They are designated gray zones where new doctrines of asymmetric warfare are field-tested before mass deployment. While you watch warnings about internal chaos in developed nations, you are missing the point. These are symptoms, not the cause. The real work is being done in the staging grounds. Observe the data points. In Iran, a systemic solvency crisis driven by internal chaos and a crippling economic downturn creates the exact pressure for a desperate lunge. India's issuance of a strong travel warning is the external market signal of this heightened risk. Simultaneously, the direct threat of a U.S. military attack on Venezuela functions as an accelerant, forcing the state to calculate the kinetic cost of an unconventional counter-move against the mathematical certainty of conventional defeat. This is not theoretical. This is a live-fire exercise. The drone strikes penetrating Russian border regions are a successful field test, proving the obsolescence of sovereign airspace against low-cost, deniable assets. In parallel, Lebanon's formal complaint that Israeli strikes actively undermine efforts to prevent escalation is an official admission. The traditional levers of de-escalation are failing. The system is now on a hair trigger, but the launch-on-warning protocol is activated by systemic collapse, not an incoming warhead. The blueprint, validated by analysts at RUSI and CSIS, is clear. When a state is backed into a corner by what it perceives as overwhelming force or internal collapse, it does not surrender. It triggers a solvency protocol. It liquidates its remaining geopolitical capital through asymmetric warfare. The prediction is therefore a mechanical calculation. Within the next 12 months, we will witness a targeted strike against critical, non-military infrastructure, energy, finance, or logistics, originating from one of these gray zones. The objective will not be to win a war, but to stress-test the breaking point of the global financial and political system. The final protocol is not designed for victory. It is designed for solvency. The doctrine is known as launch-on-warning. It assumes that in a zero-sum nuclear exchange, the first strike is decisive. Therefore, if reliable data indicates an incoming attack, you do not wait for impact. You launch your own arsenal. The system is built on one fragile asset: trusted data. Analysts at CSIS define this as a dead hand failsafe. But what happens when the hand is blinded? This is the core liability of modern warfare, the fog of digital war. A strategic cyber attack does not need to destroy infrastructure. It only needs to sever the optic nerve, the stream of data from early warning radar systems. What? A commander sees a blank screen. The protocol offers two choices. Option A: assume it is a system error and risk total annihilation in minutes. Option B: assume the worst-case scenario, that the radar is blind because it was destroyed by a first strike, and execute the launch sequence. The protocol mathematically favors option B. This is no longer theoretical. The preconditions are being field-tested globally. We see states pushed to the breaking point. Iran is gripped by internal chaos and economic downturn. Kinetic attacks occur on Russian border regions via drones. The U.S. warns Venezuela of military options. Israel's strikes in Lebanon undermine de-escalation. Each is a vector for asymmetric response. The ultimate asymmetric leverage is not a dirty bomb. It is a targeted piece of malware that forces a superpower to choose between surrender and self-immolation based on a blank screen. When a cornered state calculates its odds, the low kinetic cost of a cyber attack to trigger a launch-on-warning crisis in its adversary becomes a rational strategic option. They don't have to win the war, they just have to crash the system. The thesis of systemic collapse is being tested in real time. Data from Iran shows a state grappling with intense internal chaos and economic failure. Simultaneously, a kinetic warning has been issued to Venezuela, and Israeli strikes in Lebanon are acknowledged as undermining de-escalation. This is the blueprint for a solvency crisis. When a state's conventional leverage approaches zero, it does not capitulate. It accesses a different protocol. This protocol is not a declaration of war. That carries an unacceptable kinetic cost. It is a launch-on-warning posture against systemic pressure itself. As drone strikes in Russian border regions demonstrate, the vector will be deniable, low cost, and high impact. It is a mathematical certainty. Analysts at CSIS note that backed into a corner actors will not target armies. They will target the system that empowers those armies. The calibration shot will occur within 12 months. Expect a significant temporary disruption of a Tier 1 internet exchange point or the logistical control system of a major global shipping port. The event will be officially attributed to a cascading system failure or a sophisticated non-state ransomware group. It will not be an act of war. It will be a signal of capability, a test to see who is watching and who understands.